I'm sure you guys have all heard the narrative by now if you've been playing fantasy football. Players play better in a contract year. We've all talked about it. We've all talked about what happens when player X on the depth chart moves off in free agency. What happens to the guy behind him on the depth chart? What specific situations might we be interested in for Dynasty fantasy football purposes at wide receiver? Today, I'm going to be breaking down 10 wide receiver contract situations to follow for Dynasty fantasy football. Who will be affected and what moves should we be making to prepare for these situations? Tomorrow, we're going to have a Dynasty Decisions episode, so make sure you get some submissions in there. But on Wednesday, I might cover running backs and tight ends, depending on if you guys enjoy this video. So if you do, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. Let's hit it. All right, so before we get into this video, the inspiration for it came from an article that I read this past weekend that I thought was very interesting. It was written by Brandon Niles. I'll link it down below in the description. But basically, he looked over the last like 7 or 8 years of the increases and decreases in production for players in contract years. And I'll link that study down below so you guys can go through it. And I'm also going to discuss a lot of these findings throughout this video. But because we're talking wide receiver specifically, they were the most applicable position to the he's in a contract year narrative. So for wide receivers, it was actually ringing pretty much true. 11.9% increase was the average increase of wide receivers in a contract year, which kind of makes sense because when you think of a wide receiver in a contract year, maybe they're going to go out there, run more urgent routes, fight for more contested catches, block harder to get on the field a little bit more. For each of these contract situations, I'll try and outline how it affects the player in question, the guy that I'm talking about, and then the ripple effect about any other surrounding players in the wide receiver core, the quarterback, the running backs, all that kind of stuff. So the first one is very timely considering the release of DeAndre Hopkins this past weekend. Marquise Brown, wide receiver of the Arizona Cardinals, in a contract year this year, wide receiver 31 on keep trade cut right now. He is in a fascinating spot right now because he was like the wide receiver 12 in points per game before DeAndre Hopkins came back from his suspension. He averaged 9+ targets per game in 75% of those 8 games that he played. 2 seasons of wide receiver 27 and wide receiver 21 finishes the last couple of years. And he's basically been left for dead in Dynasty when it comes to, competing teams, rebuilding teams, and also on Underdog. I think he's a phenomenal value as well. Unfortunately, it looks like the time to buy was before DeAndre Hopkins got injured, so you might be a little late to the party, but the outlook is very strong for Hollywood, in my opinion. He's in a contract year. He's been very productive over the course of the last 2 seasons. He's the clear alpha target earner for this Arizona Cardinals offense, and obviously this offense will not be good until Kyler Murray gets back on the field, and Colt McCoy will probably be starting, but this situation is not forever. It's probably half a season, a full season at most. As far as his long-term outlook, we have a couple different options here. He could ball out with the Cardinals this year on a bad team, get a lot of garbage time work, whatever the case is, and re-sign to the Arizona Cardinals on a 2-year deal, 3-year deal, 4-year deal, whatever, where he'll be tethered to Kyler Murray, who was his college quarterback and he showed a lot of chemistry with last year, or potentially Caleb Williams or Drake May if the Cardinals are bad enough that they have a high pick and they want to just go with the young quarterback and trade away Kyler Murray for more assets and that kind of thing. I think best case scenario for Marquise Brown is that he probably stays with Arizona, and one of those situations that I just talked about kind of plays itself out long term. He also could, worst case scenario, if the team is terrible this year and he's not very good because the team is so bad, he could sign elsewhere in free agency and get a solid deal probably from another team, a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, maybe even just a 1-year prove-it deal. Either way, we have a 26-year-old wide receiver with wide receiver 2 production in fantasy the last 2 years, who's commanded, like a 25% plus target share. I think he's still a decent buy. The ripple effect of, Marquise Brown either balling out and having a great season and getting re-signed, it's pretty negligible in my opinion, because I'm not overly interested in anybody else there in Arizona. If Marquise Brown left Arizona, I would make it better for Trey McBride and Rondale Moore. Mainly Trey McBride, I think, but I'm not really that interested in those ancillary pieces. If Marquise Brown left, that means that they're probably going to draft like Marvin Harrison at the top of the draft next year. So these next few situations that I'm going to talk about, they all revolve around the prolific 2020 wide receiver class that, of course, is starting to come up for contracts right now. Number 2 on this list is Brandon Aiyuk, who's wide receiver 27 per keep trade cut. Aiyuk is very fascinating from a contract standpoint because he's long been a victim of circumstance. He's been competing for targets with George Kittle, with Deebo Samuel. It's not been a very pass-heavy offense. We've had quarterback turmoil, but he's still been wide receiver 18, 39, and 23 the first 3 seasons of his career. And even though he was in the doghouse for like half of his second season, I personally would love to see Brandon Aiyuk get traded or, sign elsewhere in free agency where he can be the number one receiver for a team, maybe like the Houston Texans, who obviously have a 49ers type of scheme there, the Giants, somewhere else like that. He's not technically in a contract year this year because he was a first round pick and he has a 5th-year option. But the motivation to play for a big contract is there because he could definitely get extended. And the motivation for the 49ers, if he does play well and maybe they're not playing so well, or maybe they don't want to pay him in free agency, is that they could dangle his name at the deadline and he could potentially get moved midseason. So there's a lot of avenues for Brandon Aiyuk to gain value. He plays really well. Maybe he's the long-term guy there for San Francisco. Or like I said, maybe he gets traded, signs elsewhere, whatever the case is. The ripple effect, obviously, if he left, Deebo Samuel would see more pure wide receiver usage, and then George Kittle could increase his target share. But that's pretty much all I care about in this offense. And obviously, maybe Christian McCaffrey would get some more targets as well. Number 3 on this list is Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 22 per keep trade cut. Like Brandon Aiyuk, he's not technically in a contract here because he was also a first-round pick and he's got a 5th-year option. If things go right in Denver this year, he might actually get extended and a long-term fixture for that team. And if things go right in Denver, you'd have to imagine Russell Wilson is back to playing like Russell Wilson. But things could also go really bad for Denver this year. And Jerry Jeudy might be a lone bright spot of this team and maybe gets traded at the trade deadline. The situation for Jeudy could very well be temporary or it could be long-term. So that's the thing that I'm most interested in with Jerry Jeudy. Is this he's got 3 to 4 more years left of Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos, or is this team going to crash and burn next year and he's on a different team? I realize the money for Russell Wilson is very substantial, but I promise you that if he is as bad as he was last year, they're going to have no problem taking that on the chin, cutting bait with him and getting him off their team, because it'll be detrimental to their team to hold on to Russell Wilson. They're not just going to hold on to him for financial stake. That's not usually what teams do if somebody is a danger to the locker room. Regardless, Jerry Jeudy went from being a sample size darling for the first 2 years of his career in 2020 and 2021 to a legitimate top 20 receiver in fantasy points per game last year, despite playing on probably the worst offense in the entire league. He's still a buy for me from a talent standpoint, especially when you consider that he could go in any which direction. Like I said, this team could get better and he could be great and a fixture of this team going forward. He could get traded at the deadline. He could be, injured next year and then sign with a new team. The ripple effect is that if he were to ever get moved, Marvin Mims and Greg Dulcich are probably good investments for rebuilders if Jerry Jeudy were off the team. And I also just think those guys are good investments in general, because Courtland Sutton, I expect to probably get moved at some point or probably play his last year there in Denver this season. So number 4 is T. Higgins, wide receiver 9 per keep trade cut right now. Higgins' best landing spot, in my opinion, is to stay with the Cincinnati Bengals, but it's not a guarantee because he was not a first rounder in 2020. So he is actually playing in a contract year. He is a free agent, a UFA after this year, and a great performance. He might price himself out of Cincinnati or be franchise tagged. Cincinnati should extend T. Higgins right now. If I was running the team, I would want to get an extension done with him, because the way that they could structure the contract, it'll look like a steal 2 years from now when you have to pay Jamar Chase. And I realize that they're trying to open up cap space to extend Joe Burrow, but Joe Burrow still has a 5th-year option left after this season, and you can always franchise tag your quarterback as well. I realize he's your franchise guy and you want to pay him, but I think T. Higgins should be a higher priority signing for them. I tend to think that they will get this done at some point, maybe before the season even starts, and there's like an 80% chance he stays in Cincinnati, but it is possible that if he goes somewhere else, he could be the number 1. Let me know in the comments. What do you guys think? If T. Higgins went to a different team, would he have more value or would he have less value? Is he capped by Jamar Chase, or does it help him that he's playing in the Cincinnati Bengals offense? Let's say he went to the Houston Texans in free agency next year, the Carolina Panthers, or the New York Giants or something like that. Would he be more valuable in Dynasty or would he be less valuable in Dynasty? Let me know in the comments. The ripple effect, obviously, if T. Higgins were to leave, would be that, Tyler Boyd, Irv Smith, some of these other ancillary wide receivers that they drafted, like Andre I and Charlie Jones, would probably see an uptick in value long-term if T. Higgins were to be gone. But I think the important one is that Joe Burrow would lose value and Jamar Chase maybe a little bit not having his running mate on the outside there. So number 5 situation to monitor is Michael Pittman Jr., the final of these like 2020 wide receivers that I'm going to talk about. Wide receiver 28 per keep trade cut. I discussed Michael Pittman being a little bit lower in my rankings a couple weeks ago due to potential hiccups with the new offense that they might experience with a run-first, inexperienced quarterback like Anthony Richardson, who needs some development. However, Michael Pittman Jr. is a UFA after this year because, again, like Higgins, he was not a first-round pick in 2020. If he performs well, he'll probably get franchise tagged or maybe extended. But the good thing is that if he performs well, it probably also meant that Anthony Richardson is performing well, and that would mean good things for Michael Pittman long-term. But I think the slightly more likely scenario is that maybe he struggles a little bit. Maybe it's a low-volume offense and his peripherals are still good, like he still has a good target share or whatever, and it's just a bad passing offense year one for Anthony Richardson. Maybe the Colts let him walk in free agency. Maybe they trade him. Maybe they tag and trade him. There's a number of different avenues for Michael Pittman. Either way you slice it, I think his value is bound to fluctuate. And I think if I had him right now, I would probably be selling him for similar ranked wide receivers like, Aiyuk and Jeudy, some of the guys I've already talked about. And maybe if you don't have him right now, I would probably wait to buy him. I would wait until like early in the season, when his value might be at an all-time low. The ripple effect of him being gone would most notably be Josh Downs, who is like my highest rostered player on Underdog right now. I'd be probably very excited about him if Michael Pittman were to be gone. I'm not really high on Alec Pierce or Jelani Woods, but I suppose if you are, they would be notable upgrades if Pittman were to leave as well. So before we get into the remaining 5 contract situations of this video, I want to take a few moments to tell you about our sponsor, Aura. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, anybody can find anything online, including your full legal name, your personal email, your home address, your phone number, and even information about your relatives. Googling my own name was an eye-opening exercise, along with obviously all the fantasy football stuff. I felt it was a big-time invasion of privacy to see all that information out there, and this information is accessible to the public because of data brokers who profit by selling your information to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers, advertisers, anybody that wants to learn more about who you are to sell you stuff. Aura will identify these data brokers that are exposing your information for you and automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf, and they'll even opt you out of junk mail and telemarketing lists. I'm sure you guys have gotten spam texts and calls before as well. They can also help with that. You can use my link right now, aura.com/fantasy stock exchange, to try 2 weeks for free to see how many of these data brokers are sharing your information. Also linked down below in the description in the pinned comment, or you can scan the QR code on your screen. And this is just one of Aura's major features. The app also features a VPN, a virtual private network, to protect your online browsing and password manager history to see if they were involved in a data breach exposed on the dark web, and give you recommendations on how to be more secure on the internet. A lot of people just use one password or a couple of passwords for everything, their banking, their websites, all that stuff. And if those become breached, it can become a huge problem for you. Aura also features real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, including a 24-hour US-based call center if you ever have any issues, internet parental controls if you guys have any kids, and it protects your devices from malware. Aura has basically every internet safety tool that you would ever need, all inside one app. It's really easy to set up, and you can get everything for one affordable price, depending on if you're an individual, if you're a couple, or if you're protecting the whole family. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up right now, you will receive a 2-week free trial with my link, and you'll be shocked at how much value you can get just in that 2 weeks. Aura.com/fantasy stock exchange to start your free trial. Also linked down below in the description, or you can scan the QR code on your screen. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. Right now, you can use my link, like I said, and you will receive so much value just in that 2-week free trial alone. Aura.com/fantasy stock exchange. Link down below in the description, in the pinned comment, or on the QR code that you can see on your screen right now. Number 6 on this list is Calvin Ridley. And it's wild to me that Calvin Ridley is still just 28 years old and on his rookie contract, because we got to remember he was older coming out of Alabama. He was a first-round pick, so he had a 5th-year option, and then he was suspended last year. So the Jaguars have a rookie contract wide receiver who's 28 years old. I am very bullish on this situation. Calvin Ridley was the wide receiver 4 in points per game the last full season that he played in 2020. And he had a 27.4% target share before leaving the team in Atlanta in 2021 and then being suspended for the entire season last year. He's got an elite quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, who at least I believe can be an elite quarterback, if not a very good one already. A capable number 2 receiver opposite him in Christian Kirk to help move the chains. Solid ancillary pass-catching weapons like Evan Ingram and Zay Jones, again, to keep the offense moving. Plus a 2-headed backfield with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, and a top 10 offensive line and pass protection. That, formula is one that is very good for fantasy wide receivers. And I would go out on a limb to say that when I do the what makes a league winning wide receiver video that I do every like July, Calvin Ridley is going to rank very, very favorably in that video because he checks so many boxes, and he can be had right now for like late first, early second round picks. And honestly, I don't view him all that differently from Kupp, Hill, Diggs, and Devontae Adams, who are going much higher than him in terms of dynasty prices. I think all of those guys have similar outlooks for the 2023 NFL season. The ripple effect of Calvin Ridley obviously balling out this year is that he would probably be retained by the Jaguars, if not franchise tagged. And Trevor Lawrence might be a consensus top 3 pick, because that probably also means that he took a huge step as a quarterback. And honestly, this offense is pretty perfectly built the way that it is right now, because Ridley's your 1, Kirk is a very good number 2, Zay Jones a good number 3, Ingram is a solid seam stretching tight end, and of course you have that backfield. I think the biggest beneficiary if Calvin Ridley did move on in free agency would be Christian Kirk, but I do think if he plays very well, he'll probably stay there in Jacksonville. So now let's get into some more here. We got the Bears wide receivers who make up my 7 and 8 on this list, not named DJ Moore though. Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney are the 2 guys that I'm referring to in this video. For Chase Claypool, I think the wide receivers in a contract year narrative might apply more than any other wide receiver in the NFL right now, because I've kind of long suspected that Chase Claypool might not be the hardest worker in the world, might not have the motivation to be one of the best receivers in the league. Because after his rookie season, you guys know that me, Danny, a lot of people were very high on Chase Claypool, and he kind of hasn't developed at all since that rookie season. And I think that's due to the fact that he hasn't really had the motivation, the work ethic to do that. So him being in a contract year, he has all the talent to put it together. And I think Chase Claypool is an interesting buy right now. The Bears offense in general is likely to throw a lot more than they did last year, considering they were at like an all-time low in terms of pass attempts per game since basically like the 1970s and 80s. They ranked below 25 pass attempts per game, which was pretty insane. Adding DJ Moore probably indicates they're going to throw the ball more. Justin Fields in his 2nd full season as a starter, 3rd year in the NFL in general. I talked about DJ Moore as somebody that I'm slightly lower on, and it's mainly because I expect this offense to be a little bit more, the target split to be a little bit more close. I don't think DJ Moore is going to be like a 30% target share receiver like AJ Brown is in Philadelphia, which is the comparison a lot of people are making. I think it's more likely that DJ Moore is like a 23% target share receiver, Darnell Mooney is like a 22% target share receiver, and then Chase Claypool is like a 20% target share receiver. These guys might all be very similar in terms of target shares, and especially when you look at DJ Moore versus Darnell Mooney, DJ Moore's target shares the last 2 years, 27.7% and 28.4%, which would be the best on this team. But Darnell Mooney's were up at 25.2% and 26.7%. So, I mean, this guy can command targets, as can Chase Claypool. His value would definitely go up with a solid season. 25.2% target rate for Chase Claypool as a rookie, and he's been over 21.5% since his rookie year in both of those seasons as well. And he's been sharing the field with talented wide receivers before. 5, 6, and 6 targets, the 3 games that he played with Chicago last year, where he had more than a 60% snap share. So I think all 3 of these guys are good in Dynasty right now. DJ Moore, obviously the biggest name and the guy that everybody's going to gravitate towards, but Darnell Mooney and Claypool are the 2 that I'm gravitating towards, at least at cost, because neither of them are very expensive. You can get Darnell Mooney for like a 2nd round pick, mid to late 2nd round pick, and probably a 3rd round pick is all you'd have to pay for Chase Claypool in trades right now, who I think could be a viable flex play. And the ripple effect, of course, is that Justin Fields could have a breakout year if I'm excited about all 3 of these wide receivers. And I would probably sell DJ Moore high, given what I think about these guys. And the other thing about Claypool and Mooney is, like I said, they're both in contract years, so they could move on in free agency, sign with new teams in better offenses, more pass-heavy offenses as well. The final 2 guys of this video also play for the same team. They both play for the Cleveland Browns. Number 9 is Elijah Moore, who's wide receiver 45 on Keep Trade Cut. Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver 72 on Keep Trade Cut. People got really mad about this tweet that I put out the other day. The market was very high on Elijah Moore last year when he had Zach Wilson as his quarterback and the Jets drafted Garrett Wilson. Now he has the potential to be the long-term number 1 or number 2 wide receiver for one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. To me, he's one of the most obvious buys I've seen for an early 2nd round price tag in most leagues. People were either mad about this tweet because I said Deshaun Watson was very good. And again, I understand why people don't want to say he's good, because he was bad in the 6 games he played last year and he's a piece of shit human being, but he's still a great quarterback. And that's what I was kind of referring to with that sentiment. And the other reason people were mad is because they were trying to tell me that Elijah Moore isn't very good, which we forget that this guy was a consensus top 15 dynasty wide receiver last year. And he had a year in his rookie season where from weeks 8 to 13, he was like the third highest scoring wide receiver in fantasy football, only behind Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel. When you post a good stretch of production as a rookie, that's a huge indicator that you're actually a talented wide receiver. He posted elite reception perception numbers his rookie season, a PFF grade comparable to other great rookie seasons, and he's barely 22 years old, playing with a great quarterback. The theme of this video is motivation. I don't think any one of us would have been motivated if we had to catch passes from Zach Wilson last year. The long-term outlook of this core is so up in the air. Cooper had his best season last year, but he's still Amari Cooper. He's been inconsistent at times. He's 29 years old. He has an out in his contract after this season. Should he regress at all? And then Donovan Peoples-Jones is the other like mini buy here because he was sneaky good last year. He cracked wide receiver 4 territory in points per game at wide receiver 47 with 9.8 PPR points per game last year, 96 targets, 19% target share. And we got to remember about DPJ that he was this raw athletic wide receiver coming out of Michigan. So a 4th-year breakout in a contract season this year probably shouldn't shock any of us because he was always going to take some time to get acclimated to develop into his natural skill set. So the ripple effect of those two is that I'm probably going to buy Elijah Moore and Donovan Peoples-Jones at cost and probably sell Amari Cooper at his current cost. And obviously you guys know I'm very high on Deshaun Watson. If I'm high on all 3 of these receivers, then I'm definitely high on the quarterback as well and the tight end and David Njoku. So back to the article I discussed at the beginning of this video, because I want to kind of put a bow on this thing. Brandon made like a mini checklist of players you should be assigning the he's in a contract year narrative to. He basically realized that there was 3 factors that played in. 1, they'd have a fairly safe position on the depth chart. So they weren't some guy getting to a new team or whatever, and you had no idea how the pecking order was going to shake out. You kind of knew where he was going to be on the depth chart. Number 2, there was no noticeable offensive decline around them, aka their quarterback didn't get injured midway through the season or whatever. And number 3, they weren't disgruntled for any discernible reason. So there wasn't like reports saying that they wanted to get traded or whatever. And when you look at all 10 names that I talked about on this list, aside from Marquise Brown having an offensive decline around him because Kyler's going to be injured, but again, that probably won't be for all of the season. He pretty much checks every box. And then Chase Claypool and Elijah Moore, maybe they're disgruntled because, Chase Claypool, like I said, I have some attitude concerns with. And then Elijah Moore was disgruntled with the New York Jets. But if the offense is good around them, I don't think they will be disgruntled. Otherwise, other than those guys, I think everybody on this list kind of checks the 3 boxes that he outlined in this article, which I thought was a very interesting read. So definitely go check that out. Like I said, if you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. If you want me to do a running back and tight end version of this video, let me know down below in the comments. Did I miss anybody as well? What other wide receiver contract situations are you paying attention to? And make sure to check out all of our sponsors linked down below in the description, including Underdog Fantasy, Aura, and check out our site for all of our Dynasty rankings, articles, content from us, as well as your other favorite Dynasty content creators. Use the promo code FSE for 30% off, a 2-day free trial, and 6 months for free when you sign up annually. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.